Welcome. You are watching Story Garden Tells, stories that grow and stay with you. Tonight, for your entertainment, I present The Buried Box. He found something buried in his garden. At first, it sounded ordinary. Just another quiet morning. Another sunrise stretching softly across the backyard. Another cup of coffee cooling too quickly on the porch railing. Elias Harper had lived in that old house for almost 7 years, and every morning followed nearly the same rhythm. Wake before the sun, feed the dog. Though there hadn't been a dog for 3 years now, and sometimes he still reached for the second bowl before remembering. Stand on the back porch. Listen. The garden had become his way of surviving silence. Not because he was good at gardening, he wasn't. His tomatoes had betrayed him 3 summers in a row, and the basil had a personal grudge. But the earth was honest. It asked for patience. It rewarded attention. It didn't ask questions. And after Mara died, questions were the one thing Elias could no longer stand. So he planted things. Roses she once pointed at during a Sunday drive. Lavender because she said it made a house feel like forgiveness. Sunflowers because she laughed every time they looked taller than him. The garden wasn't beautiful, but it was alive. And some days, that was enough. That morning in late October, the air carried the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet, the kind of sky that made the world feel paused. Elias stood in the backyard with his old shovel, staring at the far corner near the oak tree. That patch had always bothered him. Nothing grew there. No matter what he planted, the soil stayed stubborn and cold, as if the ground itself had decided it wanted to be left alone. He'd tried wildflowers. Nothing. He'd tried herbs. Nothing. Once, in a fit of misplaced optimism, he'd even tried watermelon. The earth had responded with silence. Today, he decided he'd dig it up and start fresh. No plan, just movement. Sometimes grief looked like gardening. Sometimes it looked like digging holes. He pushed the shovel into the dirt. The first few scoops were easy. Dry soil, roots, stones. Then, clunk. Metal. No. Wood. He froze. The sound had been too deliberate, too solid. He knelt, brushing dirt aside with his hands. There it was, a small wooden box, no bigger than an old jewelry case, wrapped in what looked like faded linen cloth. Elias frowned. He sat back on his heels, dirt on his palms, heart doing something strange and unnecessary. Who buries a box in a garden? He looked toward the house, half expecting someone to be watching from the windows. Nothing. Just stillness. The oak tree shifted in the breeze. Slowly, he lifted the box from the ground. It was heavier than it looked. The wood was dark with age, the corners worn smooth, as if it had been handled often before being hidden away. There was no lock, no name, just time. He carried it to the porch like it might break if he breathed wrong. His coffee had gone cold. He sat in the old wooden chair Mara used to claim as hers and placed the box on the table between them. Because even now, some part of him still left space for her. For a long moment, he just stared. People always say curiosity kills, but they never mention what silence does. He unwrapped the cloth, opened the lid. Inside was a single envelope, cream-colored, yellowed with age, sealed. On the front, written in dark blue ink, for Elias. His breath stopped. Not Elias Harper, not Mr. Harper, just Elias, like it knew him. Like it had been waiting. His fingers trembled. There was a date written in the corner. October 12th, 1987. He stared at it. 1987. 39 years ago. Before he'd bought the house, before he'd met Mara, before the divorce from his first life, before the move, before the gray at his temples, before almost everything. He turned the envelope over, still sealed. Still whole. No return address, no explanation. Just his name. He laughed once. A short, disbelieving sound. This is ridiculous. But he opened it anyway. slowly, carefully, as if whatever lived inside might be fragile. Inside was a single folded letter. He unfolded it. The handwriting matched the envelope. Clean, steady, familiar in a way he couldn't explain. He read the first line. "I knew you would find this." His throat tightened. He read it again. "I knew you would find this." A strange cold passed through him. Not fear exactly, recognition. The kind that arrives before logic. He kept reading. If you are reading this, then it means you stayed. That matters more than you know. It means you chose this house. It means you planted the garden. It means you stood beneath the oak tree and finally asked the question you've been avoiding your whole life. Why does this place feel like mine? I wish I could explain this in a way that sounds sane. I probably can't, so I'll just tell the truth. My name is Daniel, and I was once you. Elias stopped. The world seemed to tilt. He blinked hard and read it again. My name is Daniel, and I was once you. He stood up so quickly the chair scraped backward. No. He paced the porch once, twice, then came back. Because of course he came back. Because people can walk away from many things, but not from hearing impossible things whispered directly into their own name. He sat again, read on. Not exactly you. Not in the way movies would tell it. I am not your ghost. I am not your father. I am not your future standing in a mirror. I am simply the version of you who made a different choice. You won't believe me yet. That's all right. I didn't either. There are moments in life so small they seem invisible. A missed phone call, a road taken because traffic was lighter, a house purchased because the porch felt familiar, a person loved because they smiled at exactly the wrong time. These moments split us, quietly, and somewhere, every version continues. Most never meet. Some leave letters. If you are here, it means you found the one thing I failed to keep. Her. Mara. Elias couldn't breathe. The paper blurred. He pressed his hand flat against the table to steady himself. Mara. No one knew Mara. Not like that. Not in letters buried in gardens decades before he met her. His chest ached. Rain finally began, soft against the porch roof. He read, "In my life, I lost her much earlier. Not to death, to fear. I let silence become distance. I chose work over wonder, pride over apology, time over now. And one day, there was no more time. You will think grief belongs only to endings. It doesn't. Sometimes grief is simply the shape of the life you almost had. I spent years wondering if somewhere another version of me had chosen better. If somewhere, she stayed. If somewhere, the garden bloomed. I found a way to leave this, not to change your life. That isn't how life works. But maybe to remind you of it while there is still time. If Mara is still with you, tell her. If she has gone, keep loving anyway. If you are alone, do not mistake solitude for peace. And if you have found this too late, plant something. Because even grief deserves somewhere to grow. Elias lowered the letter. Rain whispered against the yard. His eyes were wet, and he hadn't noticed when it happened. Mara had been gone for 14 months. Cancer, swift and cruel and terribly efficient. By the time they named it, it already knew how the story would end. He had told her he loved her 1,000 times. But now memory played tricks. Had he said it enough? Had he meant it loudly enough to survive after? Had he listened enough? Had he stayed present enough? There were always unfinished things. A trip they postponed. A dinner they said they'd make next Friday. A conversation interrupted by ordinary life that never resumed. People think loss arrives like thunder, but often it arrives like forgetting to buy lemons. Like one side of the bed staying too smooth. Like reaching for a story only one other person remembers. He looked back at the letter. There was more. At the bottom, turn the page over. He did. One final line. Under the floorboard beneath the porch chair, there is a second letter. Do not open it until December 3rd. Trust me. Elias stared at it, then at the chair, then at the floorboard beneath it. No. He laughed again, softer this time. No, absolutely not. He knelt anyway, because apparently he had learned nothing. The third plank from the left shifted easily, like it had been waiting. Beneath it, another envelope, smaller. His name again, December 3rd. He held it in both hands. Today was October 27th, more than a month away. He should throw both letters away. He should call someone. He should probably sleep. Instead, he sat there while rain turned the garden dark and shining, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something other than grief. Curiosity, hope, fear, life. Somewhere inside him, a door he thought had been nailed shut had opened just enough for light to enter. He looked at the garden, at the place beneath the oak tree where the box had waited all these years, at the roses that shouldn't have survived summer but did, at the lavender Mara would have approved of, at the empty patch of earth. Tomorrow, he decided, he would plant something there. Not because a mysterious letter told him to, not because fate had hidden itself in his backyard, but because maybe healing wasn't dramatic. Maybe it was this: a shovel, a rainy afternoon, a reason to keep tending what remained. He folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside the box, held the second envelope close, and whispered into the quiet porch air. I stayed. The wind moved softly through the oak branches, and for just a second, it sounded like someone answering. I know. December arrived quietly, not with snow, this town rarely saw that, but with a kind of stillness that settled over everything like a held breath. The garden looked different in winter, smaller somehow. The roses had thinned, the basil had surrendered. The sunflowers were gone, leaving only dry stalks and memory. But the lavender remained. It always remained. Mara used to say lavender was stubborn in the best way. Like love, she told him once, standing barefoot in the kitchen while stirring tea. It survives places it shouldn't. At the time, Elias had smiled and kissed her forehead and thought love was something you protected by holding tightly. Now, he understood. Sometimes love survived because it learned how to stay soft, even after loss, even after silence, even after death. The second envelope sat on the mantel for 37 days. He passed it every morning, every night. Sometimes he picked it up. Sometimes he just stared at it like it might explain itself if he was patient enough. He thought about opening it early. Of course he did. He was human, but something stopped him. Maybe respect, maybe fear, maybe the strange possibility that for the first time in his life, waiting actually mattered. So he waited. And on December 3rd, at exactly 6:14 in the morning, because apparently mystery had made him dramatic, he made coffee, sat in Mara's porch chair, and opened the second letter. The paper was newer. Not new, but less aged than the first. The handwriting was the same, steady, familiar, impossible. He unfolded it slowly and read. If you open this before December 3rd, I'm disappointed in you. Though honestly, I would have done the same. Today matters, not because of fate, not because the universe loves symbolism, but because today is the day you were supposed to ask her. And in my life, I didn't. December 3rd, 1998. That was the night. The little restaurant on Maple Street with terrible lighting and a piano player who only knew sad songs. She wore blue. You were nervous. You kept touching your pocket to make sure the ring was still there. And then, you got the phone call. Work, urgent, important, temporary. You told yourself you would ask next week. You told yourself love could wait for better timing. You were wrong. In my life, that moment became a fracture, not because I stopped loving her, but because I taught her where she ranked. Second, to work, to fear, to the illusion that there would always be more time. There wasn't. In your life, I believe you stayed. I believe you ignored the call. I believe you asked. Because when I wrote the first letter, I needed to know somewhere that version existed. I needed to believe I had not lost her in every world. Tell me I was right, even if only in your heart. Elias closed his eyes, and just like that, he was back there. December 3rd, 1998. The little restaurant with candles too small to matter. The cheap piano in the corner. Mara laughing because he had somehow spilled water before even sitting down. She wore blue. God, she wore blue. Not bright blue, soft blue. Like evening just before dark. He remembered the ring box in his pocket. How he had checked it 17 times. How he had rehearsed what to say and forgotten every word the moment she smiled at him. And yes, the phone call came. His boss. Urgent. A client issue. A problem only Elias could solve because apparently the world had decided he was the kind of man people handed emergencies to. He remembered staring at the phone. Remembered the old version of himself. The younger one. Sharper. Hungrier. Terrified of being seen as unreliable. He remembered Mara watching him, not angry, just waiting. He had answered, but only to say 5 words. I can't, I'm busy. Then he turned the phone off. Mara stared, then laughed. Not because it was funny, because she was surprised. You ignored work for me? He had reached into his pocket, pulled out the ring, and said, voice shaking, no, I chose my life. She cried. He cried. The piano player kept ruining every song, and somehow, it was perfect. Elias opened his eyes. The porch blurred again. He whispered to the empty chair beside him. I stayed. And somewhere deep inside, something answered. Not words, just relief. The kind that arrives years late and still counts. He looked back at the letter. There was more. Of course there was more. Good. I hoped so. There is one last thing. By now you have probably asked yourself the wrong question. Who buried the box? Not important. The better question is, why now? Because grief makes people deaf. Not permanently. Just long enough. Long enough to miss the quiet truths. Long enough to believe endings are final. They aren't. Love changes shape, that is all. It becomes memory. It becomes ritual. It becomes talking to empty chairs and still setting 2 cups of coffee on cold mornings. It becomes lavender planted where nothing else will grow. You think you are keeping her alive. Sometimes she is keeping you. But there is something else. A chance. Not romance, not replacement. Do not insult love by thinking it only arrives once. On Friday at 4:10 p.m., go to the bookstore on Willow Street. Walk to the back, poetry section. There will be a woman pretending not to cry over a book she has no intention of buying. Be kind. Do not be clever. You were never as charming as you believed. Just be kind. And if she asks whether you believe people get second chances, tell her yes. Then tell her about the lavender. Trust me on this. Also, buy the book. You'll need it. Daniel. Elias stared at the page, then read it again, then a 3rd time, because apparently absurdity required confirmation. A woman in a bookstore? He said it out loud to the garden. The garden, as always, offered no opinion. Friday, 4:10, poetry section. A crying woman and unsolicited life advice from a man who may or may not be an alternate version of himself. He should ignore it. Absolutely. He was not going to a bookstore because of time travel grief mail. That would be insane. He folded the letter, placed it carefully beside the first, walked inside, made another cup of coffee, stood at the sink, and spent the next 3 days thinking about absolutely nothing else. Friday arrived with sunlight too bright for December. At 3:52 p.m., Elias found himself sitting in his car outside Bell and Wren Books on Willow Street. because apparently he was insane. He stared at the sign. Old brick storefront. Warm windows. The kind of bookstore that smelled like paper and second chances. He checked the dashboard clock. 4:03. This is ridiculous. He went inside. The bell above the door chimed softly. The place smelled like cedar and old pages. For a moment, he just stood there. People moved quietly between shelves. A teenager sat cross-legged near history, reading like rent depended on it. An older man argued silently with a cookbook. Everything felt normal, which somehow made it stranger. Poetry section, back corner. He found it. And there, a woman stood holding a book in both hands. Dark green sweater, hair pinned up badly like she had given up halfway. She was staring at a page with the fierce concentration of someone trying very hard not to feel something. And yes, her eyes were red. She looked up, caught him standing there like a suspicious scarecrow, and said, "If you're here to recommend inspirational poetry, I'm leaving." Elias blinked. Then, despite everything, he smiled. And for the first time in a very long time, the story changed. For a moment, Elias forgot every word he had planned. Not that he had planned many. Mostly, he had planned not to be here. Yet somehow, there he was, standing in the poetry section of Bell and Wren books, staring at a stranger with red eyes and a sharp voice, while an old letter from a man who might be himself burned quietly in his coat pocket. She raised one eyebrow. "Well?" she asked. "If you're going to recommend inspirational poetry, I'd like at least 30 seconds to prepare my escape." Elias let out a short laugh. "I wasn't planning on poetry." "Good," she said, "because if you say Mary Oliver saved your life, I may have to start throwing books." He glanced at the title in her hands, "The Sun and Its Flowers." He smiled slightly. "That one seems dangerous enough already." She looked down at the book, sighed, and shook her head. "I came in for coffee filters. Somehow I ended up crying in poetry." "That feels like a very specific bookstore problem." "It is," she said, "and unfortunately, I seem committed to it." There was a pause. Not awkward exactly, just honest. The kind that happens when two people are deciding whether they are strangers or something else. Elias remembered the letter. "Be kind. Do not be clever." He cleared his throat. "Well, for what it's worth, I wasn't here to judge your emotional relationship with literature." She studied him for a second, then smiled. Not a full smile, but enough. "Good, because I'm very attached to my dramatic reputation." He nodded solemnly. "As you should be." She closed the book. "I'm Nora." Of course she was. Not because the letters had said so, they hadn't, but because somehow she looked like a Nora, like someone who kept old notes in drawers and forgot to water plants but remembered everyone's birthdays. "Elias," he said. She tilted her head. "You look like an Elias." That sounds either flattering or deeply concerning. Both. He laughed again. It felt unfamiliar, like using a muscle he'd forgotten existed. Nora tucked the book under her arm. "So, Elias who doesn't recommend poetry, why are you actually here?" There it was. The question, the honest one. And for a second, he considered lying. Something simple. Needed a book. Passing by. Wrong turn in life. But grief had already taught him the cost of pretending. So instead, he said, "This is going to sound strange." She leaned against the shelf. "I'm already crying in public over poetry. Strange is acceptable." He nodded. "A few weeks ago, I found a box buried in my garden." She blinked. "That's an aggressive opening." "I know." "Was there treasure?" "Worse. Letters." "Ah," she said. "Emotional treasure. Much more dangerous." He smiled. "Yes." And before he could stop himself, he told her. Not everything. Not all at once, but enough. About the garden, about Mara. About the letters and the impossible handwriting. About the first envelope and the second. About Daniel. About December 3rd. About being told to come here at exactly 4:10 to meet a woman in the poetry section pretending not to cry. When he finished, Nora was very quiet. He braced himself for polite concern, for the careful expression people wear when they're deciding whether someone needs therapy or an exorcism. Instead, she said, "Well?" He waited. She looked around the bookstore, then back at him. "I do hate to admit when the universe is being dramatic, but that is annoyingly specific." Elias laughed, surprised. "You believe me?" "No," she said, "but I do respect commitment to the bit." Then softer. "And I believe people find strange things when they're finally ready to." That landed somewhere deep. He looked at her. She wasn't mocking him. She understood something. Maybe not the letters, but the ache beneath them. He glanced at the book in her hand. "What about you?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "My husband died 2 years ago." There it was. The invisible thing between them, suddenly named. Not romance, not replacement. Recognition. Grief knows itself. "He loved poetry," she said. "I hated it. Thought it was just people refusing to use punctuation." "That seems fair." "Exactly. But after he died, I kept finding books he'd underlined. Notes in the margins. Little messages I never noticed when he was alive, because apparently I was too busy being practical." She opened the book and showed him a page, a line underlined in blue ink. "To love and be loved is to feel the sun from both sides." Her fingers rested there. "He used to do that," she said. "Leave pieces of himself in books like breadcrumbs." Elias nodded. "Mara did that with recipes. Every cookbook in our house is basically emotional sabotage." That made her laugh. A real one this time, bright and surprised. People nearby glanced over. She lowered her voice dramatically. "Careful. If we keep laughing in the poetry section, they'll throw us out." "Fair." Another pause. Gentler now, the kind that no longer asks permission to stay. Then Nora asked quietly, "Do you believe people get second chances?" There it was. The line from the letter. He felt it move through him like a remembered song. He could have been frightened. Instead, he felt strangely calm. He thought of Mara, of lavender surviving winter, of letters buried in gardens, of all the ways love changed shape and still remained. And he said, "Yes." Nora watched him. He continued, "I think we misunderstand second chances. We imagine they're about starting over, like life gives you a clean page." He shook his head. "I don't think that's true. I think second chances are smaller, quieter. They're not erasing what happened. They're choosing what happens next." She didn't look away. He smiled, just slightly. "Also, I was told to tell you about lavender." That broke her, not in a bad way. Her hand flew to her mouth and she laughed, half shocked, half something else. "No." "Yes." "No. Absolutely not." "I'm afraid so." She looked at him like the world had briefly slipped sideways. "My husband used to plant lavender everywhere," she said softly. "Every apartment, every terrible rental house. Didn't matter if it fit. He said people underestimate plants that survive hard things." Elias felt the air change, not magic, something quieter, alignment, like two people arriving at the same sentence from opposite directions. Nora wiped at her eyes. "Okay," she said. "Now I'm annoyed. Because either your mysterious garden ghost is real, or I'm living inside a very committed indie film." He nodded. "Both seem inconvenient." "Extremely." She looked at the book still in her hands, then handed it to him. "Buy this." He stared. "Why?" Because apparently mysterious lettermen and dead husbands agree on things, and I'm not arguing with either of them. He took it, the same title, The Sun and Its Flowers. He smiled. I was told I'd need it. She blinked. Of course you were. They walked to the register together. Outside, the late afternoon light had turned golden, soft against the cold. They stood on the sidewalk like people unsure whether a meeting is ending or beginning. Nora shoved her hands into her coat pockets. So, if I asked whether your haunted garden also predicts good coffee, would that be too much? Probably. That's disappointing. He took a breath, the kind that mattered. Would you like to get some anyway? She looked at him, really looked, at the grief still there, at the hope trying to return, at the strange, unfinished man standing in winter sunlight holding a poetry book he didn't choose, and she smiled. Yes, she said, I think I would. They started walking, not because either of them believed in fate, but because sometimes life hands you a small, ridiculous invitation, and wisdom is simply saying yes. Behind them, Bell and Wren Books stood warm and quiet. And miles away, in a winter garden beneath an old oak tree, lavender waited patiently for spring. The first coffee was terrible. Not because of the company, because the cafe had apparently declared war on flavor sometime around 2009 and never looked back. Nora took one sip, made a face, and said, This tastes like regret. Elias nodded. Very expensive regret. She laughed, and just like that, something easy settled between them. Not romance, not yet. Something rarer. Permission. They sat by the window while December light slipped slowly toward evening. People passed outside carrying grocery bags, holiday stress, unfinished lives. Inside, two strangers spoke carefully around the edges of grief. At first, it was simple things. What do you do? How long have you lived here? Do you always trust mysterious letters from buried boxes? That last one took some explaining. Nora worked at the town library, which somehow made perfect sense. She described children who returned books covered in jam and adults who treated overdue notices like personal betrayal. Elias told her about his old architecture job, the one he still technically had, though lately it felt more like a room he kept forgetting to leave. You build houses? She asked. I design them, or at least I used to. Now I mostly attend meetings where people say the word luxury too often. That sounds spiritually exhausting. It is. She smiled. Maybe you need a better project. He thought of the garden, of the empty patch beneath the oak tree. Maybe. When they parted, it was dark. No dramatic moment, no perfect cinematic pause. Just, this was nice. Yes, we should do it again. I'd like that. And then they did. Not immediately. Grief doesn't trust speed. But over the next few weeks, life began making room. Coffee again. Then a walk through the winter market where Nora bought candles she absolutely did not need and Elias pretended not to notice. A bookstore visit where he discovered he had opinions about poetry after all, which she found deeply offensive. Lunch at a diner where the waitress called everyone honey and served pie as emotional support. Slowly, quietly, they became part of each other's ordinary. And ordinary, Elias learned, was sacred. It wasn't grand gestures that healed him. It was texts that said, "Did you remember to eat?" It was someone standing in the kitchen saying, "Your coffee is terrible, but I appreciate the effort." It was laughter arriving before guilt could stop it. It was remembering Mara and realizing memory no longer only hurt. One rainy Saturday in January, Nora came to see the garden. She stood on the back porch, hands in her coat pockets, looking out at the winter soil. "This," she said, "is exactly the kind of place where I would expect mysterious letters." Because of the oak tree? No, because of the emotional lavender. He smiled. She walked slowly between the beds, stopping near the patch where the box had been buried. Something new was growing there, not much, just small green shoots pushing carefully through the cold. "What did you plant?" she asked. He stood beside her. "Dahlias." She looked surprised. "I thought Mara loved lavender." She did. He nodded toward the new growth. But she loved dahlias more. She said they looked like flowers trying too hard. Nora laughed softly. "That sounds like someone worth missing." He looked at the earth. She was. There was no jealousy in grief, no competition. Love did not ask him to erase one person to make room for another. That was the lie people told because it made life simpler. But life was rarely simple. He could love Mara. He could miss her. He could still laugh with Nora in winter sunlight. None of it betrayed anything. It simply meant his heart had survived. That evening, after Nora left, Elias sat alone on the porch with the letters. Both of them. The first and the second. He had read them so many times the folds were beginning to soften. And still, one question remained. Who was Daniel? Not metaphorically, not spiritually, practically. Had someone written these as an elaborate kindness, a joke too strange to be funny, a coincidence sharpened by grief, or had some impossible version of life reached backward through time to leave him breadcrumbs? He didn't know. Maybe he never would. But there was one thing he had not done. He had never gone back to the box. Not really. He had found it, opened it, followed it. But he had never asked whether there was more. That night, with rain threatening again and January pressing its cold hands against the windows, Elias took a flashlight and walked back to the oak tree. The garden at night felt different, not frightening, just honest. Without daylight, everything was shape and shadow. He stood at the spot where he had first heard the shovel strike wood. The earth had settled since then. Still. Something pulled at him. He knelt, started digging, not wildly, carefully. The soil was damp and stubborn. Minutes passed. Then, clunk. His breath caught. Again. He cleared the dirt with shaking hands. Another box, smaller this time, older, no cloth wrapping, just dark wood and silence. "No," he whispered. "Yes," said a voice behind him. Elias nearly fell into the hole. He turned so fast the flashlight slipped from his hand. Nora stood there at the edge of the garden path, holding 2 takeout coffees and looking far too calm for someone who had apparently materialized from the shadows like a judgmental ghost. He put a hand to his chest. "Are you trying to kill me?" She considered. "Not actively." "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to decide if you were burying evidence or having a breakdown." "Honestly, still undecided." She stepped closer, looked at the second box, and sighed. "Oh, no." "Oh, yes." She handed him one of the coffees. "I leave you unsupervised for one evening, and suddenly we're in the sequel." He laughed, because apparently terror and joy were neighbors now. Rain began, light and steady. They stood there beneath the oak tree, 2 people holding coffee over a freshly unearthed mystery. Nora looked at him. "Well?" Elias stared at the box, at the dark wood, at the possibility waiting inside. He smiled, nervous and alive. "Well," he said, "I suppose we open it." And somewhere in the rain-soft dark, the garden listened. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Rain tapped softly against the leaves of the oak tree. The flashlight lay crooked in the dirt, casting strange shadows across the garden beds, like the whole yard was holding its breath. Nora stood with 1 coffee in each hand. Elias knelt beside the second box, damp soil on his jeans, looking like a man who had absolutely lost control of his own life. Which, to be fair, was accurate. She tilted her head. "So," she said, "before we open the haunted sequel box, Should I know if this ends with us accidentally summoning your Victorian ancestor? He smiled despite himself. If it does, I hope he has useful financial advice. Or at least better coffee. She handed him his cup. He took it, grateful for the warmth. Then he looked back at the box. Smaller than the first. Heavier somehow. Not physically, though maybe that too. Heavier in the way unfinished things are heavy. In the way memory can sit in your chest like weather. He brushed the last of the dirt away. Unlike the first box, this one had something carved into the lid. A single word. Begin. Nora leaned closer. Oh, that's not ominous at all. Not even a little. He traced the letters with his thumb. Old carving, deep, intentional, not decorative. A message. Rain slipped down the back of his coat. Finally, he opened it. Inside were 3 things: a small brass key, a black and white photograph, and another letter. Of course, there was another letter. Nora folded her arms. At this point, if there isn't a letter, I'll be offended. Elias carefully lifted the photograph first. The edges were worn, the image faded. A house. This house, but older. The porch, smaller. The oak tree, thinner. The garden almost bare. And standing in the yard, a man. Tall, dark coat, hands in his pockets. He looked directly at the camera. And even through age and grain and impossible time, he looked like Elias. Not exactly, but enough. Same eyes, same posture, the same expression people wear when they've learned life the hard way. Nora took one look and quietly said, "Oh, absolutely not." Helpful. "No, I'm serious. I reject this. I reject all of this." She pointed at the photograph. "That is either your great-grandfather or your ghost. I dislike both options." Elias stared at it. His chest felt strange again. That impossible recognition, like memory arriving from somewhere it shouldn't. He turned the photo over, written on the back, for proof. No signature, just that, for proof. His hand shook slightly as he set it down and picked up the key. Old brass, small, not for a door, for a drawer maybe, a desk, a lockbox, something hidden. He looked at the final letter. Nora took a dramatic step backward. "I feel like emotionally I should sit down. There are chairs inside." "No. If this is going to ruin my understanding of reality, I'd prefer to experience it standing." "Fair." He opened the letter. The paper crackled softly. The handwriting was the same. Daniel. Always Daniel. He read aloud this time. "Because some mysteries should have witnesses. If you are holding this, then you did not stop. Good. Some truths do not arrive all at once. People would run if they did. This is not a story about time. Not really. It is a story about inheritance. And inheritance is not always money. Sometimes it is grief. Sometimes silence. Sometimes a garden no one remembers planting. This house belonged to our family long before it belonged to you. Not by ownership, by return. Every few generations, someone comes back. Not because they are told, because something in them recognizes it. The porch, the oak tree, the patch of earth where nothing grows. They are not haunted. They are remembered. The first box was for healing. The second is for truth. The key opens the desk in the attic, the one painted over and forgotten. Inside is the beginning, and beginnings matter. You have spent much of your life believing love was something you earned by being useful, by fixing, by providing, by enduring. This is wrong. You were loved long before you became good at surviving. Your mother tried to tell you that. You were too young to understand. So, I am telling you now. Go to the attic, open the desk, read what was left, then forgive yourself for taking so long. Daniel's silence. Only rain, only breathing, only the sound of something old inside Elias beginning to crack open. His mother. He swallowed hard. She had died when he was 12, too young for explanations, old enough to remember fragments. Her perfume in the hallway, her voice humming while folding laundry, the way she used to stand in the garden barefoot even in cold weather, like she trusted the earth more than most people. And yes, the oak tree. She loved that tree. He had forgotten. Or maybe grief had filed it away somewhere unreachable. Nora's voice was softer now. "Your mother lived here?" He nodded slowly. "For a while, before my father moved us." He looked around the yard like seeing it for the first time. "I used to think buying this house was random. I found the listing years later and just knew." Nora said nothing. She didn't need to. Some truths arrive quietly and still change everything. He stood. Mud, rain, coffee, confusion, and beneath it all, clarity, the attic, the desk, the beginning. Nora held up both coffees like an offering. "Well," she said, "if we're opening forgotten family secrets hidden in old furniture, I strongly feel caffeine should be involved." He smiled. "Agreed." They walked back to the house through the rain, carrying the photograph, the key, and the strange weight of inheritance. Inside, the house felt different. Not because it had changed, because he had. The attic stairs creaked like old stories. He hadn't been up there in years. Too much dust, too many boxes, too many versions of himself he wasn't ready to meet. He pulled the chain. A single yellow bulb flickered to life. There it was, against the far wall, half covered by old blankets and forgotten Christmas decorations. A wooden desk, small, painted white once, now chipped with age. He walked toward it slowly. Nora stayed near the stairs, respectful now, quiet. The desk looked ordinary, which somehow made it more powerful. This, not treasure, not magic. A desk. A place someone once sat and wrote things they hoped would outlive them. His fingers brushed the top drawer. Locked. He took out the brass key. Paused. Breathed. Nora whispered from behind him, "Ready?" He looked at the worn wood, at the shape of childhood memory, at the place where all of this had been waiting. And for the first time, he answered honestly, "No." Then he slid the key into the lock and turned it. Click. The drawer opened. Inside was a blue journal, and on the first page, his mother's handwriting. Waiting. If you have enjoyed the story of the buried box, please be sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story from Story Garden Tells.